I'll be the first one to say that I am terrible at this documenting thing. There's all sorts of things I'm sort of like skipping ahead on and not filming, so I'm either just sort of forgetting or you're in the moment and just can't be asked. But I'm doing my best. I'm trying to make sure I capture sort of as much as I can for what I'm doing for this installation. What I've just done now is wired up the connector for my intake air sensor, which is I've got a bung, which I'll show, but I've got a bung that was installed into the aluminium intake. So that's a Haltech, you know, I mean, it's pretty standard. Like Haltech just puts their stamp on it. It's actually I think it's a GM or Denso or something like that sensor. Yeah, so I'm going to use that instead. A couple of reasons that I don't want to use the MAF. Starters, I'm using MAP, not MAF, so I don't need the MAF. The MAF takes up a lot of room in the intake. You know, obviously cars still run just fine with them, but it is, you know, it's a restriction. There is some kind of a blockage that it creates there. Switching over to an intake air sensor means it takes up, you know, this much space inside the intake as opposed to like a MAF, which is, you know what they look like. Anyway, so knowing that I'm never going to try and return this back to stock form, you know, that ship sailed a long time ago when I started chopping up ECU wires. So I'm going to, this thing, as I mentioned in a previous recording, is just the devil at trying to depin. So I've just snipped these two. I think, I haven't tested yet, but it's not the end of the world if I get it wrong the first time. But I'm pretty sure these are the intake air sensor 5 volt and the ground. So I'll just be wiring them accordingly and adding enough length there to be able to go from here to underneath here. I will eventually show you where I effed up and absolute brain fart. The location that I gave my fabricator to weld the bung on, I thought it was sort of more like down here when I'd marked it. Turns out it's more like up here, so it is interfering in this area. I hate it. I'm so mad at myself for doing it. It's potentially workable as is, but for so many reasons I don't like it. If it was down here, it would just solve all of the problems. So we'll see. I may have to revisit and ask them to weld in another bung for me. But in the meantime, I just need to get these spliced together for enough length to be able to support sort of any location. So, you know, probably about that kind of length will do. And then I just need to sheath it, although I'm out of 6mm braided sleeves, so I'm gonna have to use a 10, so it's gonna be a bit ugly, and my OCD is just gonna have to deal with it. These days, if I'm doing splicing, I generally prefer to use these. I just find it's much neater to, it takes up less space, you know, much neater to use something like this to splice wires together. They're incredibly strong if you do it right, and then you can just put some heat shrink on them or something like that to finish them up. But in this case, because I am splicing in the engine bay and I don't have heat shrink that has glue on the inside, I'm actually going to go ahead and use one of these, which is, I don't use as much these days, again, because I prefer the splicing. It's mostly an aesthetic thing, if I'm honest. But yeah, so I'll end up using these to splice it all together just so that these are sealed. They become watertight, so I don't have to worry about water getting into the connection, or it certainly drastically reduces that opportunity for water to get into that connection. So yeah, so that's what I'll use. All right, so I've been really bad at documenting some of these later stages in terms of like how things go together and where I'm at and this and that, but I'll try and do a bit of a catch up here. So I've yet to still do wiring, I'll explain that. All right, so as you can see, I've got my intake in, which meant, what else did I do? So prior to the intake, I've run the hoses for the traction oil. They are gonna go, they come sort of underneath the plenum and come down here. So that's the to the supercharger. That's the return line there. They both go under. Then the to the supercharger line is here, and the return is on this side. But of course, it's got to go through what will be the traction oil cooler down here as well. So, you know, given how tight the space is down here, it is very fiddly doing all these sorts of things. I would have loved to have been able to get away with like making no marks whatsoever on any of these pipes, but I don't care enough that the amount of effort that it would take to avoid any kind of scratching, like unless you coated it with or covered it in tape or something like that, which I could have done, but I don't care enough. But actually running the pipes, connecting them, getting the hose clamps on and everything like that, it is very fiddly. So you've got the blow-off valve down here. So the blow-off has a hose, so it's a 4mm hose initially that comes off the plenum, runs down through here. That gets bumped up to a 6mm, I think it is, to join onto the vacuum port of the blow-off valve. So that's basically, you can maybe just see it down there, but there is a connection that goes from the 4mm to the 6mm. Becomes a thicker hose here that sits there. I may look at securing that. I'm not really worried about that accidentally coming up. I don't think it can, to be honest, to touch that, but I might look at securing that anyway. So now, traction oil feed, which goes to the cooler first before it then routes back up to the supercharger. But underneath here, of course, you've got the intake pipes. So the filter is going to go on here, mushroom filter. Bit of finagling to get these things in the right place. So I was toying around with putting coolers behind the intercooler. Not great in terms of density. Obviously it means warmer air is getting through the radiator, so it's not cooling as quite as efficiently as it could. But I was sort of like, didn't really know how else to sort of fix it. I had seen some setups where they've got a cooler mounted here, whether it's horizontally or vertically around this area. So that seemed to be the smarter way to go in terms of where to put the oil cooler. I was stressing a bit about where to put this power steering cooler, and I was kind of thinking like maybe I was going to bolt it on here, but I don't like the fact that it's, you know, blocking the intercooler a little bit, but also it's just a bit ugly through the grill there. You know, it's not hugely noticeable, but you know, then you just got this big chunky power steering cooler that's coming part of the way across. Anyway, I didn't think this power steering cooler was going to fit in this area, even though that's where the stock one goes, but it's much smaller in thickness and length, diameter, everything. Like in every dimension, it's much smaller, so it's an easy fit. And if you've got the stock cooler, the HKS kit comes with a brackets. So there's a couple of brackets that bolt onto this position and another one up here. So really handy. But to that point, I did not think that my much larger core was going to fit here. And just yesterday, I finally got around, because this one's positioned where I think it's going to work. Obviously, I still have to change the hoses around to shorten them up and whatnot. But now that that's sort of positioned well, I thought I'd have a crack at the power steering cooler, and because it won't slide up, there isn't enough space with these connectors here to be able to just slide it in and out. But I figured, well, why don't I try and see if it will fit in there when I take the crash bar off, put that in, put the crash bar on, and lo and behold, it fits. And not only does it fit, there's actually a little bit of wiggle room there as well. Just a tiny bit, but enough to give me some, you know, there's room to be able to position it around. So it's not just one tight, tiny position that I've got to cut holes in. So what I'm going to do to get this to fit, that hose will be plenty to connect down through to this end. And for this end here, I'm just going to shorten it up. I've already ordered a 90-degree hose fitting here, like an AN, 6AN to push lock 6AN, which is what this hose is. Then I can just plug it straight onto that, and it will, you know, it's little niggly, but that's fine. I'll be able to, like, you know, pull it out and push it back in to get that to fit. Now, over to this. I'll also take another shot when I take this off, just to show you exactly how this is bolted on properly. But this is the bracket that I was using to be able to initially, well, for a good while, bolt my power steering cooler to the front of the radiator support. I didn't touch it. I've left that bracket exactly as it was. So bolts on this end and down here. It was just, again, pure luck that it seemed that the position was almost made for it. So the bracket's bolting into here, which is the crash bar support, and down here, which is the bottom part of the crash bar support. So I've actually just taken these two bolts out, bolted it back in, and it is absolutely secured there. It's a little tight here, so it is touching. I can move this around. I've just jimmied up this was one of the brackets that was used to secure the power steering, the oil cooler over there as well. Just seeing what kind of works in here. This won't be a final usage. But yeah, I do want that to sit back just a touch like this. And I'm also going to shave off just a bit of this corner as well, just to avoid there being any possible kind of rubbing on this area between the two. Additionally, and you definitely won't be able to see here, I'm sure it's way too dark on film, but I'm probably going to shave a bit of the front of this the radiator support there, just so this can actually angle back just a little bit more. And then the thing that made this all possible was my washer bottle will have fit in here. You know, there would have been enough room between the washer bottle and this, but of course this is useless if it's completely blocked behind it. So it needs to have some kind of a cavity or a place for the air to go, for air to pass through this. So what I did was to downsize, and this thing is ridiculous. I do not understand what market Nissan had to size these for, because I don't know anybody that would need to use them that often. So anyway, I've downsized to an official Greddy washer bottle, and honestly, because for price performance, just about every washer bottle option I could find was only a single pump. I'd like to keep the factory ability of having a 2-pump system, so that's the front window and rear window. I use them periodically, but fairly easy swap over. The only thing I had to do was just put a bit of electrical tape around the where it pokes into the rubber grommets in here. It's just ever so slightly smaller than the grommets that come with the Greddy washer bottle, so I just gave it a couple of loops of electrical tape, shoved it in, and it's doing the job. So that's going to bolt in. I'll just make a bracket for it, a couple of brackets. That's going to sit in here somehow, somewhere. Everyone's happy. That means I've still got tons of airflow to get through, but also potentially I'll end up making some kind of a exhaust vent through here so it can get even more airflow. It will also need, I think, a basic duct as well. So just some piece of like aluminium sheet. It's just bent in a few places and bolted up. That'll be enough to sort of capture air going through it, and then we're good. I got to stop saying it, but I think a bit of luck. So not much more work here to do now. Like really, these are the last things I need to do to get the oil circuits and everything like that plumbed up in the right place, and then I can start to fire this thing over. A little bit of wiring to do as well. I just need to extend the connector from this harness that would normally go and reach to the aircon condenser dryer. But yeah, with this setup at the moment, it won't reach. So I'll just need to extend that, no biggie. Yeah, so you can see here where this is bolted straight on. It's really kind of perfect, if I'm honest. So very happy with how that's worked out. So I could sand this off, or I can angle grind it off. I have actually built some brackets for the power steering cooler. So my current focus, so you can see I've got my hoses here for the power steering cooler up and out of the way. I've taken off the oil cooler at this end of the lines, but they're still attached to the motor, the engine. I'm going to take them off shortly. But my current project to work on here is going to be getting this guy situated. Now, I've left in the stock filler because I actually think I'm going to be able to use this as is. So that comes down here. So about there is where it probably should be. All right, update here. Total overkill, completely unnecessary, but I had spare crap lying around, so it was easy to do. So anyway, gold heat shield on the pumps. I've got some corrugated sleeve on the lines here, just so they don't get too hot and expand or something. I had some of the spare silver stuff lying around, like a ton of it, literally this much. Then I put some extra wrap on these bad boys, and be good to go. That should be it now. Him in, and you in. If anything happens to that, it was never meant to be.